Merci beaucoup. Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
Yann Lafreniere insists that his government is working to fight racism.
Since November, we've been announcing different measures, and people can judge us on what we do.
The Indigenous Affairs Minister for Quebec recently announced the creation of several new positions to address racism towards Indigenous people in healthcare. The public health authority that oversees the hospital where Joyce Echaquan died is now hiring 2 liaison officers, a complaints commissioner, and has created an Indigenous relations role. All the hires will come from Echaquan's community of Manawan.
There is racism in Quebec. There are people that are racist, and that's the reason why we put in place measures to stop that.
While the Quebec government recognizes that racism exists, they say systemic racism does not. As a result, they are not adopting Joyce's principle. Created by the Atikamekw Nation, Joyce's principle calls for Quebec to recognize systemic racism. The fact that the province refuses to take on a First Nations-led endeavor to combat racism is drawing fire.
It's unfortunate it's still going on and people's lives are at stake.
Darlene Kitty is a Cree family physician in Chisasibi First Nation, near the James Bay. She points to the findings of Quebec's own Vien Commission, a 2-year inquiry into Indigenous people's relationship with public services, as proof that systemic racism plagues the healthcare system.
Still, the current government does not accept that there's systemic racism, but we know there is. We know for sure. It's been happening for decades.
She's not the only one demanding the province recognize systemic racism. An open letter is blasting Quebec Premier Francois Legault for failing to adopt Joyce's principle. The letter, penned by Samir Shaheen Hussein, a Montreal pediatrician, calls the government's refusal harmful because systemic racism causes unnecessary suffering and, in extreme cases, quite literally, kills people. For his part, Lafreniere says he was happy to read the letter.
You see that people are quite interested in the matter. We agree to disagree on the definition of systemic racism, and we don't want to fight on words. We want to fight on racism.
We've had intentions. We've had these things be said to us. We're patiently waiting for decades, for centuries, for at this point, for our rights. At one point, you tend to ask is, what exactly are we supposed to do in order for us to get this basic need?
Alicia Tokiapik was the first Inuk woman to run in a provincial election in 2018. The Nunavut community worker says it's baffling that the province is continuing to deny the existence of systemic racism.
The systemic racism that he denies shouldn't have gone this far to be dragging on where it's quite obvious it is existing, especially with Indigenous people.
Meanwhile, the investigation into the circumstances surrounding Echaquan's death continues. Quebec's coroner has announced public hearings to begin in mid-May. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.